All righty. All right, so our first presenter today is Lewis Lawrence, who is the Executive Director for the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission and Secretary and Lead Planner for the Middle Peninsula Chesapeake Bay Public Access Authority. Louis specializes in applied local and regional planning and policy development and oversees the only state-funded revolving loan program for living shorelines in Virginia and the only structured resiliency program in the nation, the Fight for the Flood, or Fight the Flood. With that, I will get Louis' presentation up here, pass it and get it up. And presentation is Building a Water Management Economy Through Innovation, Matrix, and Dredge Material Story. So bear with me 1 second. I'll get this up for you, Louis, and you can just let me know when to.
So when she brings that up, can you all still see my screen before she brings it up? So this in my hand is a piece of dredge material that we just got back from a structurals laboratory that's been already converted into a cement product that has passed its first level compression tests for the market. So the company that we're going to talk some about already has done what we set out to do, which was, can you take dredge material and turn it into something that's got a commodity value? And so now the same material is now going back to the same engineering laboratory to test it for commercial grade strength testing to see if they can move it into the commercial space. So I wanted you all to know that it's more than just a concept. We're doing real stuff with dredge material. Okay, so opening slide, obviously, we're going to talk some about building water management economy through innovation. One company in particular, Matrix, and their dredge material story and how we came about doing that. I'm the executive director for the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission, which is located on the lower portion of the Chesapeake Bay, just north of Colonial Williamsburg. Many of you all have probably been to the Virginia Institute of Marine Science at some time across your professional career. This material actually came out of the boat basin at VIMS. We took the absolute worst material that we could find in terms of grain size and said, if we can figure out how to turn that into a cement or a concrete-based product, every creek in the Chesapeake Bay can be turned into the same type of product. So anyways, with that, you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the problem that we started with probably about 5 or 6 years ago was when my commission, which is comprised of the 6 counties and 3 towns in the Middle Peninsula, essentially took the political handcuffs off of us. And they really laid down this kind of line in the sand and said, we don't need to see any more maps from VIMS or any of our academic partners showing our communities going underwater. We understand that our communities are under great duress from water. What are we going to do about the problem? So they gave me a directive of don't let your people drown on your watch. Go build programs and solutions. Make our community the most resilient community on the Eastern Seaboard. So getting that level of political courage from that many units of government is really unusual. And you're going to see what we've been able to accomplish over the last probably 4 years once they took the handcuffs off and said, do spectacular things in the water management space. So one of the first challenges that we needed to deal with was the cost of living shorelines for traditional ones, which are on the left. Generally, the number that VIMS uses and puts out that we use inside of all of our proposals is $600 a linear foot, and that's installed. Well, imagine walking across your own yard. Every time you take a pace, $600, $600, $600. Most of us would be able to afford about 9 paces worth of living shoreline, not $100, $200, $500,000. So we knew that we needed more innovation in the living shoreline space. And we needed to bring new products and new solutions into the space, and we needed to drive the cost down. And we oftentimes needed, we've done it twice now, changing state law to create a little bit broader definition for living shoreline. The product on the left is the Matrix product, which we'll talk some about. The product on the right is Fleximat. Some of you all might know that from if you worked in the stormwater world. It's a concrete biscuit fabric, a geotextile that's rolled out along the shoreline, and the Spartina grows up in between the biscuits. So we had to change state law last year to allow Fleximat to be recognized as a living shoreline technique. Both of these 2 products, the Matrix and the Fleximat, at least from the rural part of the Chesapeake Bay, are more aesthetically pleasing. And that's a key to moving a lot of these other innovative solutions forward, is if you're producing an ugly product, nobody wants to buy it. If you're producing a good product that protects water quality and habitat, people will buy it. Okay, and those products, many cases, can be reduced by 40% over that $600 linear foot. So when you're talking about a 40% cost savings, it's not a hard lift to move the public into some of these other alternative solutions. Next slide, please. Okay, so how did we organize all of the structure around what we're doing? We created what was, and probably still is, the only structured resiliency program in the nation called Fight the Flood. You can go to the URL at the bottom and see it. The whole idea behind it was we were hearing from so many waterfront property owners, I don't know who to call, and if I call them, they won't call me back. My bank won't lend money. I don't know how to finance this. So we built this online marketplace that is intended, if you think about it kind of in tiers, the top tier is education. There's nothing special about it. You can go to 100 different websites and learn about educational information about living with the water. But it's the second tier and third tier is where we did something that has not yet been done anywhere in the nation. And that's aggregating water management companies together with a lot of different financial products so that we're building a full circle water management economy. Got a problem? Here are people that have solutions, and here's money to pay for it. Next slide, please. So over the last probably 3 years, we've already generated, now we're up over, I think, $27 million, because the last time we posted was in January. So this is direct parcel scale level investment. Most folks might say, well, 24 million is a big number, but really not a big number. Well, it is if you're talking about individual parcel owners. That's a lot of protection money that's being poured into the Middle Peninsula, and it's all through our structured program. Next slide, please. So to give you just kind of a snapshot of what some of it looks like for the companies, we've attracted companies all the way from Canada down to Florida. I've got some companies in the Gulf now, and we've got a lot from the central part, the Chesapeake Bay area and around, that are all actively providing water management solutions within the Middle Peninsula. So if you went back before the advent of our program, we virtually had no water management businesses. So we've been able to aggregate and create out of thin air this water management economy. Most of the companies, it's been rather interesting talking with them because they've said, let me get this straight. You're going to send us customers and you're providing financing and it doesn't cost us anything. And we said, yeah, that's exactly correct. And so they really do like this market-based model because they become the beneficiaries of a lot of the resiliency investment as we continue to build out this ecosystem. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about Natrix in particular. All of the companies, and we're up to 32 companies now. They all have their own business directory page. And this is just one example of Natrix. And it's intended to help the consumers figure out who's out there providing the services, what choices do they have, and then how do they get in contact with the company. And we make sure before we let the companies in that they understand if you violate the public trust, you're out. The whole reason that you're in here is to provide a higher level of service, to be responsive, and to protect our community at the same time. Next slide, please. All right, so we're also really good at continuing to change state law and create funding streams in areas where there is not currently a lot of state investment or federal investment. When the Corps of Engineers, when Congress defunded the Corps of Engineers shallow water dredging program, we likened that to the stoplight analogy. The light was blinking yellow and now it's turned red. If they're not there and the Coast Guard boat bumps the bottom, out comes the channel markers. If the channel markers come out, then the marine businesses that are on these creeks and rivers, nobody's going to come into their facilities if they don't have channel markers. And so we had to create the Virginia Waterways Maintenance Fund. And the state legislature has been pumping in between $1.5 to $5 million annually to fund dredging projects. And so that was enabled to help us keep our marine highways open. But we wrote into the law that any of the material that's utilized that has to be utilized, the good material, for beneficial reuse. So obviously the sand goes on the shorelines, but we've got all of this other stuff that's smaller particulate size than just sand. So call that fines. So this is just one particular project on Aberdeen Creek on the York River. It's of similar size. We probably got 100 creeks of this size. It's around 50 to 65,000 cubic yards of dredge material. To give it scale, that's 5,000 dump trucks of dredge material. That's a lot of stuff. And historically, it just goes into a landfill. Nobody can do anything with it. So we decided we need to do something with it. It's an asset. It's a commodity. If we can figure out how to protect our communities with it, that's a really good thing. Next slide, please. Okay, so back up one, jump two. Nope, right there. Yep. Okay, so we got a $6 million Go Virginia grant. Go Virginia is our state agency's economic development initiative where we link together Virginia Sea Grant, my office, the Public Access Authority, and RISE, which has received a fairly significant EPA grant to begin to look at these water management solutions in the Norfolk, Virginia Beach market area. RISE knew that they needed access to publicly owned property, of which my Public Access Authority has a lot. We own over probably $5 million worth of donated waterfront property that now serve as test laboratories for a lot of these water-based management businesses that have widgets that they're trying to get to the marketplace. And then that's monitored by Virginia Sea Grant. So we gave companies from all over the world $250,000 prizes for very specific and targeted water management solutions, of which one of those was dredge material. And so Natrix won that award. And the task in front of Natrix was to figure out, how do we take all of this dredge material that's going to the landfill and to protect our shorelines with it? Next slide, please. So Natrix has a process. I'm going to read off the slide here so I can see it on my page here. So they got a $200,000 prize. They used a process called calcined clay, which is known as pozzolan, and that's a cement replacement. It's a formula that they believe the Romans were using to make cement in Rome. And so basically you take this material, you heat it to 800 degrees, and then the clay is activated into calcined clay, and then you have a cement replacement product. That calcined clay can replace up to 75% of the Portland cement, which is a standard concrete mix supplied in Virginia, which is already highly limited. Calcination reaction does not produce any CO2 as a byproduct. It also has a much lower temperature in the manufacturing process, so it actively reduces the CO2 footprint by upwards of 80%. Globally, we've lost over 150 billion tons of hard substrate to sessile organisms. So we've got to use concrete material and dredge material differently to provide new substrate that's out there. And we also thought it was kind of important to note for you all, since you're NOAA, a lot of you all are, and that's part of the Department of Commerce, that's the cement shortage threatens a lot of economic activity at the national level. And we think that utilizing dredge material provides a lot of economic development nationwide, far beyond what we're doing in the Middle Peninsula. The units on the right were some larger test units that Natrix produced using dredge material before they started sending the product to the laboratories to be able to see whether or not they could get the structural composition that was needed. So that's the second part of what we have also done, is send out the laboratories, which I showed you all earlier. Next slide, please. All right, so a little bit on what Natrix does. They deliver advanced technologies for solutions for a new standard in climate resiliency. You're looking at a project on the East River there off of the Mobjack Bay. We got a NIFWIF grant a couple years ago to start bringing in, under the compare and contrast model of building 50% of the project a traditional living shoreline, and then 50% some of these 3D concrete printed Natrix units, so that the scientific community can monitor and then better understand what they do and how they function. We design all of our projects to 25 or 50 or 100-year FEMA storm event. We're really concerned about building these structures that are bigger, stronger, more robust to be able to live with the storms of tomorrow, while also providing significant water quality and habitat protection. The Natrix product is really fascinating. They fly it with a 3D drone, the shoreline, and they'll use LiDAR so that they can get the natural ebb and flow of the shoreline. And then when they go back to their 3D printer, they'll put that into their little computer brain, And then when they 3D concrete print the structures, it better matches the natural ebb and flow of the shoreline. So it really blends in with more of the environment. So you don't end up with a big pile of rocks that is just there. The other thing that we did not anticipate, we'll close with a couple slides on this. NOAA is funding another project for us at Hog Island within the Middle Peninsula Habitat Focal Area, which this one is as well. And what we noted was the speed of which these 1,000-pound units could be put in. That the company that won the award was able to put in about 80 linear feet of 1,000-pound units in several hours worth of time. To do that same type of structure with rock, it would take you days. And so they were able to put in structures so fast that we were able to request financial reimbursement from NIFWIF 2 days after the grant was funded. And that was faster than what NIFWIF had actually loaded the money into the system. And so they were so good and so efficient at deploying it, we ran into cash flow reimbursement problems. And so our two contractors had to issue stop work orders because we couldn't get the money out of NIFWIF fast enough to be able to pay the contractors to be able to build out some of these alternative structures. Most unintended consequence. It was a good unintended consequence, but it was really interesting to recognize how fast these units could go in. Next slide, please. So a little bit more, about Natrix. There's a different slide, a picture at the lower left of what the units look like when they pick them up. And also the other thing that was real interesting, Natrix products under, at least for Virginia, the Virginia Public Procurement Act, it's not considered construction. Where if you're doing a living shoreline, that is with rocks, that is considered construction. And since these units are pre-manufactured, it's really just a lift, put, take, lift, and place. And so it doesn't meet the procurement threshold for construction. So I think what we're going to see over time is a lot of these innovative solutions. The states that are going to begin to deploy these and think about bringing these other products to market, you're going to start to run into new questions about how do you procure it, and that has an efficiency relationship to the speed at which the projects go out. So we are really learning a lot about not only how to do it, but how to move through the procurement process to get it done effectively. Next slide, please. So this is how Natrix comes in. They do the evaluation, then they design it 3D, then they produce it with their 3D printer, then they deploy it, and then they come back and do some quality monitoring. So what we also like about what they do is it's a one-stop shop. And that was also one of the concerns that we were seeing from a lot of property owners. They got to talk to Joe about a permit. Then they got to go talk to a state agency about a different permit. And then they got to go find a contractor. And then they got to order rocks because the contractor may not want to order rock. And what we like about Natrix is they bring wholeness of solution. So once they touch the private property owner, that's it. They handle everything from start to finish. So it's a much better integrated and more efficient method for moving these products out. Next slide, please. So here's some photos of a couple different types of Natrix units. You're seeing some of the big ones, some of the moderate size ones. They can deploy them in any shape and any size. The ones on the right are some of the Middle Peninsula examples that we've already put in. Nothing much more than that, just pictures. Next slide, please. And so here's some of the Hog Island example here, which is part of the Middle Peninsula Focal Area. So we have two grants that are operating concurrently here that Natrix is manufacturing units for. One is a NIFWIF grant, and then the second one is a NOAA grant. These are 1,000-pound units. If you go back to standing on the shoreline at Hog Island and you look directly east, the fetch is coming all the way from Africa. So it probably has the highest fetch area of anywhere in the U.S., except for probably a direct ocean-facing fetch. So when we permitted it the first go-round, the Corps of Engineers came back and said, can you get a little more weight to this? We're worried they're going to tip over. And we were able to say, sure, how much do you want? And they said, what can you do? We said, Natrix can manufacture these units at any weight that you want because it's not dependent on the size of the rock. It's based off the specifications. And they said 1,000-pound units. And we said, okay, 1,000-pound units they are. And so Natrix was able to go back and they just punched the button and out came these 3D concrete printed 1,000-pound units. Shipped down here, offloaded onto a barge, shallow water barge, draws about maybe 8 inches. So it can get in pretty close. They've got a little crane on it. They lift it up, place it in the water. That's it. I think that might be the last slide. You can go to one more. Yep, that's the last slide. So I'll be glad to answer any questions that you all might have.
I see one question in the chat from Captain Al. He's asked, how long does the product last once deployed?
So the company has been deploying them for probably 3 or 4 years. Whether or not you're talking about the regular cement product, which is going to last as long as other cement products that are in the water. So there's a lot of research on that. Part of what we're also doing with our Go Virginia grant is as they can begin to manufacture the dredge material, they can do that mixing a lot of different ratios of dredge material to the cement combination. And so we're going to be testing some different combination units and putting them in to see how well do they hold up and for how long. They don't, in their laboratory testing, they think it's going to be as long as regular concrete in the water will last. But we're going to put out some test models to be able to monitor it as we go to make sure, because we just don't know because they haven't been mass producing them. And that's what we're doing right now is that mass production and structural testing on the units.
Bill Shadles asked, has wave attenuation monitoring been done? Has it been measured for any of these projects?
Yes and no. So Scott Hardaway down at VIMS has done a lot of our shoreline design work. And when we started this a couple years ago, I talked to Scott about how do we crosswalk the wave attenuation and storm surge that FEMA rate insurance studies show for the shoreline to make sure that rock that was going in at that time is right sized. And, so Scott, brought out his whiteboard and showed me how they do that. They'll use the FEMA rate insurance study. They'll go, in our case, to the VDOT stone manual to make sure they're getting the right size stone for living shorelines. And then they're able to design the structure based off of what the rate insurance studies say that wave storm surge energy is going to be. And then we're able to choose, and we talk with the homeowner about their level of protection. Do you want to manage for a 25-year storm event, 50 or 100? And then once the homeowner decides that, then that sets in motion, how big the pile of rocks are and how much they weigh. And it's the exact same thing for the Natrix units. So we make sure at a minimum, we're not designing, if the homeowner doesn't have any concern or position on it, we try to go for 15 to 25 year at a minimum. And then we'll go higher if the grant budget or loan budget will afford that. And most of the time, the homeowners want that highest level of protection that they can get, juxtaposed against the view shed impact. So we've got to show them, okay, this is what a 100-year thing would look like. This is what 50 would look like. And this is what 25 would look like.
Any other questions for Louis? Zena asked, the product is manufactured, shipped from North Carolina or elsewhere? I had a question about this too. Do they only work in the Middle Peninsula area and do they ship from where they work? Do they go to other regions?
Yeah, so Natrix has had a really significant footprint down in the Gulf for a very long time. And they were coincidentally one of the first RISE competition winners for an unrelated project. And I stumbled across their company information at some professional conference. And once I saw their product information, I realized that product will sell well in the Chesapeake Bay. It is aesthetically pleasing. And so I basically cold called them and said, hey, look, here's what we're doing. I want you in my Fight the Flood program. And I think your company can do tremendously good things. And oh, by the way, we're also building out this water management economy. And oh, by the way, we're going to have these business innovation challenges that are going along. And so they became the recipient of a lot of the effort that we've been putting into building this water management economy. And so we created, because when we first attracted them, their product was not legally permissible in Virginia. And so they could not sell it. So we had to go back to the state legislature and create a lane for them to be able to sell their product because it wasn't recognized as a living shoreline product. We argued that it was covered under the existing statute, but the environmental community said, we don't agree with you. And we said, well, okay, well, then we'll go back and clarify the law then. We'll make it clear. And so under the other structural materials definition of Virginia's definition for living shorelines, we added concrete and geotextiles to that definition. And the environmental community was comfortable with that. You know, we went through a good open process so that they could understand what it is and how it operates. That law went into effect July 1, 2022. So they've been authorized and enabled to be able to sell their products since last July. And so we've done several products since then. Their company does manufacture in Raleigh, but what they are now looking at doing, because we have and are active in the dredge material management space, is moving their entire corporate headquarters to the Middle Peninsula to be able to be closer to the dredge material product, so that we're reducing the distribution cost of having to move dredge material, you know, all over the place by tractor trailer or train car or whatever. So the part of the model that we have is hydraulically dredge it. It goes into a barge. It's shipped up to the public facility. It's offloaded directly there where the Natrix manufacturing unit can process it, dry it, and manufacture it. And then we could ship it nationwide on rail or flatbed or wherever.
And who's paying for the dredge material to go to the Natrix? Yep. Is that the dredgers? It's like cheaper than putting it in a landfill for them?
So there are a couple different things that are going on with that. Since the Corps of Engineers got out of the funding generally of shallow water dredging projects, no one was doing dredging at all in the Chesapeake. So all of our creeks were filling in, and the Coast Guard was yanking out channel markers all over the place. And so we knew that we needed to do something different, so we created the Virginia Waterways Maintenance Fund that the Virginia Port Authority oversees. And it was devolution at its worst. You know, the feds moving away from it, pushing it down to the state having to create a funding bucket to be able to pick up what the feds were no longer funding. So once we knew that we had a continuous flow of financial money for dredging projects, then we started to permit as many dredging projects as we possibly could, moving all of them through the pre-dredging work to shovel ready so that they could be queued up. Then we would go back to the Port Authority for the implementation money. And again, all of that's happening concurrently with all of this water management stuff. So all of it happened about 4 or 5 years ago. What we've got tied up in the state budget right now is, as we began to get cost estimates for dredging the first generation of dredging projects that we queued up with the Port Authority money, we also did a business study nationwide to try to look at how much dredging projects cost and why do they cost so much. And what we were able to definitively prove was about 40% of every dredging project is profit for the dredging companies. So the mob and demob cost is where the dredging companies are making their money. Most dredging projects in Chesapeake run up between 1 to 2 million. So they're averaging about $1.5 million. Well, if you can drop that private sector price from $1.5 million to $750,000, that's a far better return on the public investment. So we went back to the legislature and said, we need to buy a municipal dredge. We need to be dredging these projects because we can do them for 50% the price. And then we'll own the material. And once we own the material come out of the pipe, now it becomes an asset instead of a waste product. And so that's where a lot of the structural interrelationship between Natrix, thinking about the dredge material no longer as a byproduct, but a manufactured raw material, has been evolving. And if the state would approve the budget, you know, right now, which we're hoping will happen very soon, they wanted to get past the primaries, the legislature, before they decided what they were going to do. If that money stays in the budget, then we will be going after a municipal dredge, which is commonplace. There are a lot of municipalities that own dredges right now for this exact same reason, but they're just shipping the material to the landfill, where we're not going to do that. We're going to store it and manufacture product with it. One dredging project alone can do 65,000 cubic yards, can do 200 miles of living shorelines. And you can probably reduce the cost. If we own the material, now the material cost is almost at zero. So being able to protect shorelines at a fraction of the cost is so vitally important for the biggest problem facing the coastal world.
Dave, did you want to say something? Oh, I saw you come on camera.
Yeah.
Louis, I've got two more questions. One is, what about contaminated dredge material? Does this sequester contaminants? And my second is, are we seeing any oyster recruitment or ecological uplift from these Natrix projects yet?
Yeah, so part of the pre-permitting and shovel-ready work, we took sediment samples for every project in the Middle Peninsula and had them send them to the chemical lab to test them. 100% of every dredging project was clean material. And again, it's not surprising because we're rural. We don't have any industrial footprint. There would be no reason, for it to have heavy metals or bad material in it. So we've yet to find anything that has something bad in it. And then the oyster recruitment, I think the first units that we put in for Natrix have been in now for about 9 months. So we need to probably get on the fall to see what the first year's recruitment did and what the spat strike looked like. So we'll know. I've got BIMS is supposed to go out in the fall under our NIFWIP grant and do post-construction monitoring on the first set of Natrix units that went in. So we'll know a little bit more about that pretty soon.
Keep us updated. It's interesting. I see a lot of use for it in a lot of our more developed areas for sure. Adriana asked a question and she asked, has there been any consideration of creating the dredge material based products so that they slowly erode and resuspend fines and make them available for natural processes in the estuarine system? And she's saying this because in our back bays, we're sediment starved. So resuspending some of those fines may have benefit. So just wondering if the Natrix.
That's come up a couple times and it's a pretty funny story. VIMS did not warm to this notion of using dredge material this way. They like granite. And we reminded them that granite is an invasive species. Granite is not native to the Chesapeake Bay. And so why is it okay to bring granite in, which is invasive, versus using the material that's naturally found already there? And so we've had to have some pretty complicated conversations about what are we trying to do here? No can't be the answer to everything. We've got to take and take an experiment and try some of these solutions because the water's coming at the end of the day. And so that question of concrete eroding away versus granite, absolutely. Over time, the concrete structures will. Now, we're talking about that in the geological sense. Granite is not going to erode, but the concrete will. So you will have that naturally occur. But if you're looking to accelerate that resedimentation, I think that's probably just a function of the recipe that Natrix utilizes when they're manufacturing the product. And if you want one that breaks apart faster, I'm sure they can, create the recipe to do that. It's really based on what you're looking to accomplish within the watershed of where you want the units to go.
And I'm guessing if there's high recruitment, that oyster veneer kind of keeps the structure in place and sequesters whatever cement's underneath of it. Yeah, I agree, Adriana. She says she sees this as a positive feature of over rock. So yeah. Any more questions from anyone? Come off mute or put it in the chat, please.
All righty.
All right. Well, Louis, that was very interesting and unlike a lot of the types of projects that we're doing up here. So we really appreciate the out of region expertise here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you all want me to come back and talk about some of the other companies, I'll give you one that you all will probably care about. One of the other water management challenges is septic. All of our coastal communities are suffering from the exact same problem. One of the companies that we attracted has developed with Bill and Melinda Gates funding. It was a third world septic solution. They never thought about it in first world applications. The septic technology does not require a drain field. 100% can eliminate the drain field. So noodle on that as far as water quality in these low-lying coastal areas and what that can do for nutrient removal. So that product will be brought to market in probably the next 10 months or so. We're going to have 3 test units going in on some public properties that we own, same properties where these Natrix units are going in. So we've got a long laundry list of really unique companies that are in this water management space that have a fantastic story to tell. And we're placing the storytelling in the lap of Virginia Sea Grant. They're monitoring the science side of it, and I want them to be able to tell the story back through the networks and channels that the Sea Grant structure touches, which is many of you all professionally. So that will be coming.
Great. We're going to keep in touch. You're coming back, Louis. This is really interesting stuff.
Yeah, glad to do it.
Yeah,
all right.
Thank you so much.
Our next speaker is Captain Al Majeski. He's a Habitat Restoration Program Director for the American Littoral Society. And he has over 28 years of experience in science-based coastal restoration and biological monitoring. He has managed numerous restoration projects in the region, including living shorelines, beach restoration, salt marsh restoration, flood control, oyster reef creation, and fish passage. Today, he's going to present a few of the Society's latest shoreline protection tactics, some of the ones we might not have a lot of results from, but are kind of pushing the envelope on tactics. So thanks so much for speaking with us today, Captain.
Hey, no worries. Can everybody hear me? And you're seeing my screen right now, right?
Looks good.
All right, great.
We're good to go.
Great. And yeah, Louis, great presentation. I have many questions for you. I'd love to talk to you more about some of these things and actually, you know, testing some of this material up in New Jersey area, because we've tested other projects in New Jersey versus in the South, and they didn't last as long, and some did. So it's kind of interesting to see how they react or how long they last in different environments. So I am Captain Al Majeski. I'm the Habitat Restoration Program Director for the American Littoral Society. I'm a certified ecological restoration practitioner and also a certified coastal ecologist. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit here is some of our innovative combinations of using kind of more traditional methods of living shoreline creation and restoration, how we kind of combine them together, and then pivot a little bit and adaptively manage these things as we move forward to kind of have a more successful restoration. So mine's going to be more based on just case studies. And most of you that may know me, I can talk for hours on things. I really pared down what we've done to date since Superstorm Sandy. And the Society's done over 50 restoration projects of various sizes since then. And I brought it down to you to 5. So it's not going to be a very long presentation, but I can make it long if you want it, you know. In Delaware Bay, because I'm going to start from the south, I'm going to talk about the mouth of the Morris River restoration project that we're doing and continuing to do right now. And that's a very large project, multi-million dollars. And then I'm going to move into Barnegat Bay, which is a very expansive bay in New Jersey, used to contain 75% of submerged aquatic vegetation. So you are limited in what you can do with your restoration based on how you protect SAV. I'm going to talk about, though, and that's some innovative approaches that we've done in different energy environments, whether I'm talking low energy or high energy. Slaydale Living Shoreline, which I'll get into, is a low energy environment, and that's a marsh restoration, more of an indirect marsh restoration. Orchid River Beach is an oyster reef restoration, using some innovative ideas, but bringing in a bigger team, too, to kind of really study these things as we go so we can adaptively manage as we move forward with these projects. And then I'll move to the north in Monmouth County. We're taking what we've learned so far from these other restoration projects, and Louis touched on one I thought was really interesting, with Spartina coming through more of the a mosaic of concrete blocks. That's going to kind of be like what we're doing at Shark River Island. So we're kind of moving to that hybrid living shoreline piece and connecting the green with the gray. And then I'm going to talk about our most recent project, South Riverside Drive Living Shoreline, where we took, again, what we've learned in other restoration projects, but then kind of innovatively combine these traditional methods to create what we want out there when we restore. So just to kind of give you an idea of some of the projects or the partners that we have in these projects, and it starts with the core partners, of course. In Delaware Bay, there's just 3 core partners really right now, and we're building into probably we have over a dozen or more partners. And that includes our funders as well. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife is a big funder of ours, as well as National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They've funded pretty much most of our beach restorations and our reef restorations to date. And DEP's come in now and funded us for the mouth of the Morris River as well through a Reggie grant, and then the others here as well. So just to give you an overview, and some of you have seen this before, and those of you who haven't, that's why I added this in here before I move into the mouth of the Morris River. We've pretty much restored about 5 miles of beach. And we do this for the horseshoe crab and the federally listed red knot as well. We want sand on the beach so the crabs can come to this global epicenter where the red knots stop off, lay their eggs. They can feed on those eggs. And there's other resources throughout that year that we've been noticing through our research and our monitoring, that the eggs of the horseshoe crab really are, to us, a staple of the diets, and not just the birds, but the fish as well throughout the entire year. We've dropped about or moved about 2,000 tons of rubble, put a lot of sand in there, and we continue to do sand. And I didn't really go into that because I know that Quinn had talked to you guys last session, I believe, and she was really going into the evolution of what we learned down there, and you know how we're moving from bringing sand in from the quarries and now using that material. And Louis, you said it very well too. In New Jersey, we're learning that, you know, the sediment and the things that we dredge is actually a resource that we can put back into the system, and we need to. So it's not a byproduct of something else and shipped off anymore. We want clean stuff, and sand's clean, so we can use that on our beaches. You can see Quinn down here building reefs. We started out with bag shell. And interesting enough, we just got a grant through Ray to build upon the footprints of these reefs. The sand has accreted on these reefs and actually has done what we wanted it to do. No longer is the reef existing. It's actually covered by sand now. So we want to go back and we're going to build on those reefs again and continue the process, just like the oyster would, being that the ecological kind of ecosystem, you know, building upon itself vertically. We're doing the same here with our reefs. As the sand comes in, we build up. And we hope in that effort, we're getting a good idea of how we can compete with sea level rise on the beaches here in Delaware Bay and other things as well. We tagged a lot of crabs through all these processes. You know, we permit in our organization, we do all the work except the engineering, and then all our partners too, because you're only as good as your team. You guys all know that. But we have regional 10-year permits down in Delaware Bay. We have state blanket permits that we can renew that allows us to go ahead and revisit these beaches in this dynamic system in a more programmatic way. And that brought me into thinking, like with Fortescue Beach, which is in Cumberland County. We started that beach, we just trucked in sand. Now we partnered with New Jersey DOT last time, and we were able to go ahead and have about, I think it was about 25,000 cubic yards of good sand placed in there. We're going to build, as soon as we can, some hybrid living breakwaters in front of that, because it's a little higher engineering environment, to keep that sand on the beach for a prolonged time. But the partnership itself helped us leverage other grant funding, and actually, I think it was like almost worth $1.67 million that the DOT did for that dredging project. And we were able to kind of dust it across 3 different restoration projects that NIFWIF funded and meet that match. And that kind of brings us into the work that we've done. And Quinn had talked about this probably more in depth, into the mouth of the Morris River, where we're doing a very large grand scale project right now. So the mouth of the Morris River, this is a major economic river in Delaware Bay, in Cumberland County. And what I'm showing here briefly is just kind of the design plan, conceptually how we, in the beginning, and the location of where the river is. But as it comes out, and you can hopefully see my arrow here, this is Basket Flats. Basket Flats is a peninsula that has been eroding for a long time. And I think there used to be some barges out here that were placed by the state or somebody else to kind of hold that peninsula together. That didn't work necessarily. And then you have Northwest Reach over here. And Northwest Reach is about a 400-acre mudflat that, you know, if we do things right here and we can and create a different environment, we may be able to bring that marsh back over time. And that's partly what I'll show you here in a few minutes. So Basket Flats, this is what we recently did. We put in 9 living or hybrid living shoreline breakwaters is what we call them. These are on tensar mats. They extend from the tip all the way down. And at the tip here, we have a 600-foot revetment that we put in. The interesting thing about this, and where you start getting more innovative with how you do things, is when we started the planning process for the mouth of the Morris River at Basket Flats and for Northwest Reach. Basket Flats, unfortunately, within 3 years, we lost about 150 feet of marsh. And we're seeing that throughout these projects that we're doing, that we need to move quickly, but we need to be thorough as well. We went ahead and did a redesign kind of on the fly because we had already mowed and experienced this as we're in the stages of mowing, bringing the rock in and things like that. And we were able to go ahead and redesign this in a way that actually works. And you can see the waves attenuating here in both pictures as we're building this out. And we're very fortunate that we had at least 6 of these hybrid breakwaters. And they're about, I think, 100 to 200 feet long, and they have about 50-foot gaps between them. But we're fortunate enough that as the storms came through last season, we were able to save some of this marsh and kind of reduce that erosion rate here. Again, these are funded by NIFWIF and NJDEP, of course, and our partnerships are growing. So who we work with in Delaware Bay. We're bringing in others from around the state, trying to keep it local and stimulate the economy as well, and bringing that and continually adaptively managing this. My title here kind of says, oh, we have mattresses and rock and geogrids and shell. The shell we're putting in, I think within the next month or two, and that goes to the lee of these structures on the tensor mats itself. And we're going to kind of test it out to see where the shell moves and how it moves and what sets on it. The CHARRM, which you can't see here, this is not low tide at all, but at low tide, we have an elevation that we're looking at now where we want to place CHARRM logs, because what we've created here into the lee of these structures is a more quiescent environment, and that environment is going to be lower energy, so the CHARRM should hold. That's great. And then hopefully the sediment will come out of solution, or maybe we come back and add some sediment behind that CHARRM to get the elevation that we need to go ahead and plant that Spartina. And we're also looking at, putting rib mussels in areas, or better yet, what I kind of been told was, why don't you create that habitat for rib mussels and really anchor in your Spartina? So we're looking at all these different things as we monitor this going throughout. So the innovative approach after that is doing what we're doing on Basket Flats. And this is kind of a view of across the mouth of the Morris River. This is Northwest Reach, where we're going to do 18 hybrid living breakwaters here, but taking what we've thought about with the CHARRM logs going parallel to shore and setting them at different elevations, or some kind of impervious or permeable, however you want to say it, kind of a barrier, so we can trap this sediment over time. But also, to make it more manageable, run some perpendicular, and then maybe do, once we reach that elevation, 100 plugs here or something like that, and then move it down. We learned a lot from another project that we did in Thompson's Marsh, in Thompson Beach, actually, in Cumberland County, very near to this area. And you could do a lot in smaller sections, and you have better chance of success, not really expanding and trying to do 400 acres at once from what we saw, but moving to 20 acres, but creating smaller parcels and working with that. This would also be part of, hopefully one day, working with, and we have a great opportunity here, working with the Army Corps, working with the NJDEP, Fish and Wildlife, and others. We all have projects that are that are funded down here, and just working together, using the materials coming from the dredge, and kind of complementing each project very well. So I see this as a synthesis of organizations, a growing partnership that can really get creative and innovative with the resources that we have available. So that brings us into Barnegat Bay, moving north. Again, I show the core partners. You can see things are growing here, and this is just overall partners, but for each project that I'm going to show you, the two projects here, we have 15 to 20 partners. The community's always involved, stakeholders too. And I really think that breadth of scope and that different experience that comes to the table really helps give your project breadth of scope and gets you prepared for how you might have to pivot moving forward, and how you might want to have to combine different conventional or traditional strategies. So the first project I'm going to talk about is Slaydale Living Shoreline. This is in Point Pleasant, New Jersey, so kind of like smack dab in the middle of our state. It's a nature preserve, about 13 acres, located along a creek. There's not a lot of fetch here or anything like that. It's a relatively low energy environment, but it is owned by the municipality. Now, I always think this is kind of the innovative piece too, when you start partnering the municipality, even today, and we started this project in 2018 and just been building on it. The municipality is still there. And that's great. They've actually put a line item into their budget to give us, not a big bunch of money, but to kind of keep carrying on a community science kind of a thing. And it's great how everybody's really come together and the community's engaged with this to let us be more systemic. I won't go into other things here about who it's named after, but okay, I will. Slaydale, great mariner. I think he actually helped pioneer the powered engine or the motorboats and vessels like that. I know he took a small vessel and went from all the way up and down the ICW, different things like that. So you had some really hardy characters here that were really in tune with the area as well. So I always like to learn a little bit about the history of it, the cultural history, but also the ecological history. And you can really see, and I'll show you in the next slide, how this is eroded. If you look at this red circle here of what the existing looks like now, this existing marsh. And what we've seen here is there's very little low marsh, maybe a foot or two wide width, fringing marsh here and there, very patchy. And then you get into stress marsh. And the other thing that we see is when you get back farther here on the fringing of the forest, there's a lot of burn, and that's more salt burn starting to create those ghost forests. So we're kind of figuring out, okay, if we pull all this back, we can capture sediment over time, create that low marsh. Can we then go in, replant some of that high marsh as well, and then build some of these cedar forests back on that fringe? So here's what it looked like in 1930. And you can see it's very different from what the picture I just showed you, that area on the last slide. And over time, we've lost about 4 acres of salt marsh since 1930. That's about 31% of it, and 2 acres from this project site. So our idea was, and this is kind of a pocket marsh. So you have condos on this side, and you have condominiums and a park on the other side here too. So we have to work within that area. How do we expand it? How do we bring it out and really bring back that marsh, but also reduce the rate of erosion? So it's a slow process. And then thinking on the outside of the box, as we're building this and doing this project, because we're not going to directly restore the marsh at this time, but maybe over time, or if there's a dredging project that comes up by Beaver Dam Creek or in Beaver Dam Creek, can we use that material wisely to build up that marsh platform? So the plan was to restore salt marsh fringe habitat at first, and we've gone beyond that now and what we're thinking ahead, but reduce the erosion, of course, and improve sediment accretion. We modified basically what we saw because remember I said this is a low energy environment. What we saw them do in New Orleans after Katrina, doing branch box breakwaters. Why don't we try something like that, but use a resource that's available to us here all the time, or at least once a year, that we know people can get involved with. The community will be engaged with this by giving us their Christmas trees, and we can do it every year. And as Mayor Bob of Point Pleasant says, we always seem to, we go back and we restock these cribbings that I'm going to show you in a minute, usually around Earth Day with the community. They come out, they get in waders, they get wet with us. We restock everything and get it going again. And he always says it's like Christmas and spring. And it really kind of resonates in the community that they're a part of something. So I think that's kind of an innovative way to do restoration over time, and especially when you don't have a lot of money invested in it any longer. So Zach, who's on the phone, he designed this little poster, and people really liked it a lot. They got engaged, and we started our Christmas tree campaign. You know, we're repurposing Christmas trees. The Department of Public Works, they got involved, and they would collect the Christmas trees for us. And I think in the first year we had over 1,800 trees collected. We had a tree drop off the next year, and in the beginning, as usual, and I talked about pivots, being a little more innovative, combining different things. In the first year, all the trees that we collected, when we were getting ready to go do the restoration a week before, we had a good drought for about 3 weeks. And unfortunately, the town had to come in and chip all the trees because they were a fire hazard. And we're like, oh no, what do? We can't do the restoration this year the way we wanted to. But that kind of give us time to think a little bit more on the project. And we could move forward and collect trees again. We involved the church. So now we have another group of people that are engaged in this project. And at the same time, developing a community science program. And the next year, we were able to put all the trees in each one of these things that you're going to see here in the next drone shot. We always do outreach. We always make sure the press is involved and get some kind of exposure out there in the public so other people around can come into that are outside of that community. And over time, well, actually through the pandemic, we learned the life of a Christmas tree in this kind of saline environment, this brackish environment. It lasts about 1 year. We learned how long the coir would last for the twine that we tied it down. And then we started doing, instead of we were doing branch box breakwaters, but on the shore, we would do perpendicular to the shore to catch sediment. We were doing Christmas trees staked in like they were coir logs. And we decided to just move to coir logs. And we started doing small shoreline pieces where we can accrete sediment there and get the elevation we want and plant them. So very similar to what I was talking about with the mouth of the Morris, making manageable little parcels that we can slowly bring back the marsh edge. So this is just a show of volunteerism and how it all works with us and people getting involved here. A great time to get out there and do it. And the one picture is just me and my daughter sitting on about 800 trees. So it kind of shows you that everyone's involved, all ages can come out and help. This is what it looks like since, I think, last Earth Day. This is a drone footage. So it's a relatively large project, but not super large. And you can see from the picture, the way things are set up, that we're catching waves at different ways. So wakes and things like that. Not a very huge fetch, but we're hoping over time that we can bring the shoreline out and then eventually close that off. Bring the shoreline out, eventually close that off. So do things in phases, not in one shot. So next steps, we're continue to monitor with our community science program. Like I said, we added core logs close to the shoreline.
Hey, Captain.
Yep.
So sorry to interrupt, but can you go back to the last slide? We want to concentrate on tactics. And so the tactics you employed, I don't think everyone here understands what they saw in the last picture. Can we go back and just talk about the tactics?
You want this, Daddy-O?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
And when you say tactics, how do you want me to address that?
Well, describe like the pilings and then a branch boxwater, breakwater, like
okay.
the Christmas trees in there. And yeah.
Yeah, no problem. And like I said, we kind of adapted this and modified it from what they did down in New Orleans after Katrina. And they were using, I think, down there like 2x4s and things like that. And this is a little bit more robust. So we have pilings and they're set off, and this is probably a really good picture right here in these two, on 4-foot centers, depending on how we want to design this. And originally, when the engineers, they had just rock breakwater coming straight across, and we didn't want that. We wanted something more diverse. So they're pilings set like that, and then Christmas trees are placed on the inside of this and stuffed down, and then they're secured. Basically, we tie them down all the way through. It lasts about a year. The pilings were put in by a contractor, but the Christmas trees have all been done by volunteers. So that further engages your community. Every year, like I said, except I think 1 year during the pandemic, we couldn't. Every year we're redoing this project, but it's working. We are accreting sediment inside these cribbing as these trees are are just dissolving. They're leaving a little bit of a sludge, a little bit of a ledge on the bottom, and we'll keep building up on top of that. So you're really kind of creating more of a sediment, earthen kind of a wall over time. And it's good fish habitat for right now with the trees as well. Did that kind of answer what you wanted me to talk about, Danielle?
Yeah, like just the tactics, like what, because not everyone knows what you know what I'm saying. So yeah, and we got a lot of time we need to save at the end. So if we could just talk about the tactics, that'd be so great. Thank you, Captain.
Yeah. All right. So I think I covered that, but I know, and then along the edge, the combination here that we're using CHARRM logs now, and they're kind of scalloping a little bit as they come through to capture sediment that may come out of solution from inside here. So there's definitely a tactic here, and that moves from what we're doing down in the mouth of the Morris as well. These things kind of take time, but the fact that we have a channel here that does get dredged, we have also a source if we want to speed it up when that comes into schedule. So now, I think we've all talked about this before, we can actually schedule a restoration around dredging, not dredging around a restoration. So that kind of leaves that open too for discussion. So now I'm going to move into Barnegat Bay, open water, and this is Forked River Beach. Forked River Beach is located in Lacey Township. For those of you who are familiar with New Jersey, it's exit 74 off the Garden State Parkway. And again, innovative partnerships, you really want to have a breadth of scope here so you don't miss things. We brought in the town, we brought in Citizen Race Car, who is a videographer, to kind of film things as we go, so we can actually have these videos go out to other people around. I think we showed this video and a couple other videos that we've done on other restoration projects every 2 years at the Ray conferences, and they did like movie time. So other practitioners come in and say, hey, wow, this is how they're doing things down there. Why don't we try that? And vice versa. And of course, academia, wildlife restoration partnerships. These are experts in avian and as well as in drone things. And the Fish and Wildlife Service, Apex Imagery, another drone company at that time. Parsons Mariculture here, well, that's my oyster person setting oysters and things like that. But let me show you kind of how this really kind of worked out. A little bit different strategy. So what we do down in Delaware Bay, we were doing all by hand with volunteers, and we're like, well, how do we do that up here? We don't have 6 to 8 foot tides like we have in Delaware Bay. We have 6-inch tides in Barnegat Bay, you know, that tidal range. We have clinging jellyfish, all kinds of different things where would really kind of affect a project. So we thought long, hard, and deep, and a pandemic came along, and we realized that what we're really doing here is we're creating this with HESCO baskets, and I'll show you what that is in a minute. But just to give you an idea, if you look here, these two little, it looks like an equal sign, kind of shows you how this has been eroding over time since 1995. And that's shuffleboard courts that people used to play shuffleboard on. Eventually, You can start seeing the one go, and then towards the end here, there's none left. And this was happening. This was like expedited erosion that was happening here over just from 1995 to my last slide. And it got worse right before we did the project. Of course, it was at least 150 to 180 feet of shoreline that was lost. And now you're really in a community that's right there on top of things. We're not in Delaware Bay. We might have a better expanse, or that other one that I just showed you at Slade Dale. This is really, the bay is in people's backyards. It's in their homes. It's lapping at their doors at high tide, regular high tides. So it's kind of interesting. What can we do here in this small kind of area? So we wanted to protect 2,600 linear feet of shoreline, of course. And originally we wanted to do 8 intertidal living shoreline oyster reefs. We did 7, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But remember, I told you 75% of SAV is in Barnegat Bay. So we kind of want to make sure that we minimize or avoid any impact to that, to the most, most practicable that we can, something like that. And we want to make sure we're not affecting EFH and we're not affecting HAPC, but we're also impacting, again, minimizing any impact, but also making sure that we're getting functionality out of this restoration and perhaps providing ecological uplift as well. Again, outreach programs, community awareness. How do we get the volunteers involved if we have a 6-inch tide, clinging jellyfish versus what we have down in Delaware Bay? And then we monitor all this back and forth. The other thing that we had here in the design was we had to think about ice. We hadn't seen ice in Delaware Bay for about 4 or 5 years, and that could be due to climate change, or it could be cyclic, you don't know. But we have seen it in Barnegat Bay. How do we protect what we're building here, these oyster reefs, from ice? So the design, the HESCO baskets, and I didn't have the slide for Delaware Bay, but very similar in design. We use a herringbone double road kind of a thing for wave attenuation. These are about 200 feet each. They have 5-foot gaps between each segment. And to protect each reef, we went ahead and put in piles every so often. And that's what those blue dots are right there. So those are our icebreakers, but they were also going to be used for signage. So number one, we want to put signage up for navigational hazard. So we're still working with the Coast Guard on that because some of the residents didn't like all the piles that we put out. And we may modify this and cut some of the piles out every often and put like either a galvanized pipe that goes up about 8 feet. So you have that line of sight for those mariners and they don't hit your structures. And we're thinking about all these different things. And we're actually even looking at an art grant because they want to decorate these things at Christmas and have people come down. So who knows? You know, it's a cross between ecology, aesthetics, different things like that. So this kind of explains why we went from 8 to 7. Stockton College, Dr. Lacey, SAV specialist, I could say, expert, he's even better, mapped out our baseline and also mapped out afterwards and just did a recent study that hopefully we'll get some data on soon. But this area up here had about 50% composition. The rest of this area was probably between 10 to 25, 35%, very patchy. In talking with the state and talking with NOAA Fisheries or NIMS, it was decided that we remove that reef. So we did. This is what the HESCOs look like. The HESCO baskets are steel, pretty much, galvanized steel. They're used by the military for barriers. When we first got this project, in the mind of myself was the United Nations had a mile of this and they didn't know what to do with it. And I'm like, I'll take it, you know. Turns out that it went somewhere else. So we had to purchase this through HESCO. The way it's designed is it has an interior here. The interior is filled with rock, I believe like 6 to 8 to 10 inch rock. That kind of weights it down so we don't have to stake anything in. And then each of these units that are about, you know, roughly 12 feet by 5 feet, on the outside, we have what's called shell faces. At least that's what we call them. HESCO call them rock faces. So we modified that right away to shell. And that's filled with recycled shell. Basically on the outside offshore reef, we filled that with 400 cubic yards of recycled shell from Ocean County restaurants. So that kind of involved the people and telling a story again that, you know, what you eat and then we put it out here, then you can maybe eat it again one day, who knows, but kind of showing that cycle of the oyster itself. And then we also are setting and have set already on the inshore reefs, 32 million oyster. And we're setting, hopefully, if everything pans out, another 32 million this year. And that's done through Parsons Mariculture and an aquaculture facility. Once the shell's set, we bring that shell, which is whelk for the inside reef or inshore. And the whelk, of course, is the New Jersey State shell. So it's kind of, we're really trying to tie in all these different ideas as we're moving. What's really interesting on this project is we're also in seasonally shellfish harvesting classification waters. You can only do it seasonally, so we don't want people to poach. So we have to use those piles as well for educational signage. But we had to put up a surveillance and security system as well. So when they can't harvest, we have an MOA with the state that says, we're going to watch this. We created a whole security plan that involved Marine police, the community doing their own community reef watch. If somebody walks through the yard with a bucket and starts collecting oysters, they need to call somebody and call us. And then we would document that on a Google Docs page. And also involved the police and the cameras that we had, the surveillance as well. So there's like 4 different components to this. And we just renewed our MOA with the state about a month ago. And what we have to do now, which is kind of cool, we figured out, we started with 1 camera as a pilot. We're going to have 4 cameras going in different directions so the state can look at hull numbers and things like that if it's poachers. But also we have to think now about bird deterrence on these. My understanding from what we learned from the state was some of these structures, birds land on them. It changes the water quality temporarily. So they don't want us to document when a bunch of birds might be on these structures or on the pilings and kind of design it that way, but put up things that are bird deterrent. And one of the things I thought was pretty interesting too, so another innovative way we're trying to think, the birds get used to the deterrence, so you have to change that deterrence out ever so often. We're not funded for that, but we know another grantee farther up in Barnegat Bay, who's actually an oysterman, they have a grant like that right now. So we're learning from them as well on what we can do there. Can we share assets and resources and things like that? And maybe we do a test pilot down on these guys as well.
Hey, Captain Al, sorry to interrupt, but I gotta give you a 2-minute warning here because we still want to have our discussion.
No problem. I'm almost there.
Right.
So this is what it looks like today. And you can see the piles, the reefs. It's pretty extensive. I got the last 2 projects coming up. Partners, boom. Shark River Highland Hybrid Living Shoreline. So this involved e-concrete, very similar to some of the mattresses or you showed, Louis. Placed at the toe edge along the channel of Shark River Inlet that goes out to the bridge. And then from there, we tied in the reef with tensar matting and a sill. This wasn't necessarily an ecological project. This was resiliency. It was built to kind of protect the condo association behind it. Another interesting thing about this island, it was created all from dredge material. So pretty straight lines of contour out there and how we had to work with it. But yeah, restored about 90 feet of marsh, brought that back, planted it. It looks good today. And the last project I want to show is the one we just finished up. And this is a 2,000-foot linear feet shoreline along South Riverside Drive. Very low elevation beaches used by horseshoe crabs. The outfalls are horrible. Nuisance flooding, all kinds of things going on here. And again, you have the neighborhood, the people, the residents right up on the shoreline. So how do you restore that? And this just gives you an idea of what it looked like beforehand. You can see the scalloping, dilapidated outfalls. So the idea, again, pretty traditional in the way we're setting it up here. We're using the dilapidated bulkhead offshore. In front of that, we're placing a sill, basically a mattress sill. Behind that, where the dead men are, or not the dead men, but the pile there, the dilapidated pile, coir log to pin it in our spirina to create this coastal marsh that's there. And then the beach comes up about an 8-to-1. And of course, we come into a berm that we vegetate. And we learned a lot here. And you can see this photo here. What we have here, one of the conditions here is not necessarily wave, but it's tide. And we're so close to things that are happening where there's nuisance flooding that we could see that we were going to lose some of this berm that we're creating. So we went ahead and started terracing coir logs. Knowing that we're going to lose it, we're going to have time to create these terraces, these sand steps that we can plant and hopefully better establish that back barrier. So this is what it looked like before. This is what it looks like today. And you can see right here, we also, and this was the contractor that figured this out, to access, how to make access just using sand and kind of keeping that dune really not any kind of a chink in the armor here for flood. And we recently had a flood and none of this area flooded at all. And it used to flood quite a bit. So interestingly enough, this is an interesting method to kind of prevent more of that or abate some of that nuisance flooding too, as well as provide ecology. And this is where it comes in, final slide. The ecology of things, you can see here, the first one is the spartina we planted. I think we planted 8,000, 9,000 plants already. So that's all the coastal marsh that we had to create so far. And we're not losing that, but we are seeing people walking their dogs and the dogs scratch it up. So we have to go back. And then we have about 16,000 dune plants that we planted. They're doing well. You can see how we're doing the coir logs here, using our resources and kind of terracing them as they go. And that's it. So I did it, Jesse. Thank you.
Thank you. Folks from the audience have any questions? We're waiting for that. I actually did have a question with regards to the Slaydale project with the Christmas trees. Have you done any water quality sampling? Like, has the breakdown from like the actual Christmas trees like done anything with the water quality, or kind of like, I just think about the the acidity from like pine trees and whatnot.
So we have not done any water quality. We've been more focused on accretion of sediment. We could do that, but mostly what we have out there for the community science program, and I guess it's so standard that you're doing out there. You're doing very basic monitoring of things right now because we don't have that funding in place. So more like salinity and engaging that way. That would be very useful data to see. But we are seeing a lot of avian use, more fish, these kind of things. Like, I mean, this is all just observance, but we're seeing a lot more activity in there because I think it's just a more quiescent environment where things are they finally have an area to kind of hang out and be a little more protected.
Anyone else, either in the chat or if you want to come off mute? If not, I think Danielle, I think you have our presentation. But before that, Captain, I just want to say thank you very much for your presentation. To you and to Louie. These are really great. There's a lot of good tactics to discuss, and I think this will kind of go into our next part of the meeting here, like kind of discussing more about the different tactics. So Danielle, I don't know if you want to pull it up. We can take it from there.
Yeah, before I put anything up, in our last email, I said if you guys had any tactics that you wanted to put on the table for discussion, bring a picture or a topic. I have some queued up if you guys are quiet to kind of get us going, but I'd love to hear from you guys first. So if anyone has a tactic or a topic they'd like to bring up, or something related to the presentations we just saw, just come off mute or put it in the chat.
Well, Danielle, I think we talked a little bit about it yesterday, but when is adaptive management considered adaptive management, and by which agencies? Because we've experienced in some of our projects where we have to go back and re-permit things or modify that permit. And other times one agency might say, no, you're good. That's adaptive management, what you're doing. And another agency says, no, you have to go through that whole permitting process again, just for this small piece. So where's that balance? And, how do we figure that out together?
So what you're saying is, like, when we try something new and we're collecting data around it and we have to tweak it, how to fold that into the permitting process?
Well, not just that, but how is it interpreted by which agencies? How can we come together on it and say, hey, you know what, together, this is adaptive management, where I might have to get fully permitted by the state for a whole new project that maybe is 10 feet of coir log versus Army Corps permit saying, no, you're good.
Katie, you just came on camera. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So I think at the state, we're still trying to figure out what adaptive management means for us. But I will say, with the latest permitting of the Abbott's Meadow Restoration Project, we approved the entire adaptive management plan as a permit condition. And I suggest reading through that more to see kind of what we felt comfortable with. And we were pretty comfortable with a lot. I think what triggers new permits and what we're still trying to figure out is something that you mentioned, like if someone wants to add 10 feet of new coir log. With that, we just want to make sure that impacts are minimized, and that's part of what we permit at the state. So if there's any, I guess I don't design these sorts of projects, so I don't know exactly the thinking process behind it, but maybe if in the design some sort of buffer area can be incorporated, like some sort of contingency plan that if, additional core logs need to be added, that could be written into adaptive management. And then when you do your monitoring report, you could submit a as-built. I do that with investigation for remediation projects. We don't want to stop an investigation, so we let you go out there, do what you need to, and then you report back. So that kind of similar line of thinking of kind of plan it in advance, maybe that further. We're still getting more comfortable with adaptive management, and I think it's really what people are bringing to us. And I hope for the future that we start developing more of a skeleton document of what we want to see in those adaptive management plans. And I think that's exactly where we're headed. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, that's a good idea to think about as we're planning and designing a lot of coastal resilience projects in the back bays right now. Doing something like making sure a buffer is part of the contingency plan design, maybe have a separate design that has the adaptive management baked in. That's a really interesting idea. Does anyone else have a tactic or a topic that they want to put on the table?
I'm thinking I might have to put
Fine,
my presentation
guys.
there.
Can I return to a question from the last
Please.
presentation? This is Zena, by the way.
Yes.
I was wondering when you were talking about bird deterrence and on the HESCO cages, and you mentioned that you would have to switch tactics up because birds acclimate very quickly, that we know, to any scare tactics. And exclusion is seems to last more long term than scare tactics if you're not going the lethal route, and I'm not advocating for the lethal solution for that. Can I ask, what are you trying?
So here's what's been suggested to us. And part of it was disguise your cameras so no one steals those. Maybe disguise them as a weather station that has a propeller on it, or, for a wind. And then they were talking about zip ties that stand up, all kinds of things that are being tried. But to me, what the state had told us was nothing's working for very long. And you're right about that, Zena. So we haven't really even gotten into it yet. We just signed that MOA recently, and we were never funded to do any bird deterrence. So now I have to go back in my budget and see how I'm going to do that. So it's going to be low cost. But I think if I can go to the other grantee, not us, but the aquaculturists, and see what they're trying and maybe combine forces again, create that partnership, we might be able to find something out. And what the state also told me, from what they learned, it's only for like a month or two. And I think right now they just want us, as we're monitoring, we have the video cameras out there. Is that month or two happening where the HESCO baskets are or not? So I'm glad that we're learning so much together. So the state's really become a great partner for us, as well as the federal partners that we have, and really monitoring these things as we're putting them out there. It could be as simple as birds coming. Who was thinking about that? We were thinking about oysters and fish and resilience and water quality. So we're a little bit outside the box for us. Have you experienced stuff with bird deterrence?
Well, I work largely with shellfish aquaculture, and bird deterrence is a major concern, as far as I understand, up and down the East Coast. And aquaculturists have been searching for that magic solution of easy to work around, not expensive, and very effective. And as far as I understand, there are trade-offs on all ends. Nobody's found the magic combination that works everywhere all the time, and is easy to apply and inexpensive. And our growers have tried zip ties has not been very effective for our birds in our area, unfortunately. And that's why I was asking, because always wondering what other people are doing and what they're working on.
Well, I had my email on there. If you want to email, when we find out more from, the oystermen that are kind of putting these things in place, I'll let you know what they're trying and what's working, what's not. I wish I had that magical spell and it could be that winged wizard to kind of give you what you want to know, but we don't know it yet.
Yes, we've got some growers that are using spikes on some of their equipment or bird sweeps. I'm trying. A few tried owls and eagle kites, and I don't believe that those were very successful for our growers.
Okay, if anyone has another tactic or topic they want to bring up, please do. Or I'll show some different pictures of other tactics that are used in other regions, and we can just like go through and talk about pros, cons, and data gaps on these tactics.
Danielle, it's Zena again. I was searching, and it may not be novel for anyone else but me because I am newer in the living shoreline world, and so I can talk about it, and you all might go, "Yep, we've already been there, seen that, done that." But when I was looking around at some things, because I understand that oyster shell in plastic bags has its drawbacks ecologically with the microplastic concerns and breaking apart, but it is cheap and lightweight and holds for a long time. And I know that in our last meeting, we heard from projects that used jute, and it worked somewhat, but didn't. And so I'd been reading, and I saw that in the University of Florida has a partnership for plastic-free oyster shorelines. And they wrote that they have had some success with making modular plastic-free alternatives to shell bags. And they combine jute fiber and put low shrink grout on top and can form it into different forms. It is better than Portland cement, and it seems to hold up. And so I thought that was an interesting alternative for shell bags. There are a couple of different places where it was written up. I'll put one in the chat.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that was a topic I did want to bring up, Zena. So I think that's a perfect topic, is alternatives to plastic shell bags. And I think I was thinking more of like the starch bags and those types of materials. I know that American Littoral Society and Partnership for the Delaware Estuary are conducting pilot studies to test the longevity of these products and the tensile strength. So to be determined how they work in situ, because we want to make sure that they hold up until we can get recruitment. Would love to, put that information out to this group, but this tactic you're talking about is really interesting.
Well, I saw too that oyster growers in Maine are moving to use a beechwood twine to sell their harvested product. But when I
That's one of the ones we're testing, yeah.
It said that it's compostable and it degrades in 12 weeks. And I think, especially depending on time of year, 12 weeks might not be enough time to really build anything that would hold together. And so that's an interesting idea, but in that current form, I don't think that it's applicable to these activities, but perhaps something like it or a more robust thing. And again, I'm speaking without a lot of knowledge on the subject, so I'm willing to be corrected or have people who are more knowledgeable step in and guide the discussion.
Ella.
Hi, yes, it's great that that you brought that up, Zena, because yes, as Danielle mentioned, the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary is currently testing a couple different alternatives. This is in partnership with the Rutgers Haskin Research Lab. I have a photo, just, I think I can I share? Am I sharing? I am
Yes.
sharing.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is actually for a project that's funded by the military, a DARPA project, where we're looking to use plastic shell bag alternatives, specifically for a project that we're doing down in Florida, where they don't allow plastic or metal in their living shoreline projects anymore. So this is part of a project where we're making a habitat mosaic behind an oyster reef. And we're looking at some of the alternative materials to use back there. So I know already this JetNet Corp material has already broken apart just at the Haskin lab down in that area that Captain Al was talking about earlier. So, you know, we're still looking into this. We'll be reporting out on the results. But this overall DARPA project is also kind of interesting and cool and related to some of the other things we were talking about already in this call, because of the way it's trying to incorporate these biodegradable, carbon neutral, carbon absorbing concrete modules. This is all still being designed, but you know, I think we at PDE and at Rutgers are really excited that the military is interested in this kind of technology. They're also looking to selectively breed oysters to recruit on this that are going to be dermo resistant and fast growing. So there's a couple of kind of innovative techniques that are going into this. That's going to be a fairly rapid timeline project. So, you know, we can't share all of the details about this yet, but as more of it comes together, we'll definitely be updating people in this group about our results. So thanks for bringing up all those topics, everyone.
Ella, when are we going to see this in our region, in Chesapeake Bay, Delaware Bay, New Jersey back bays?
We are just Saturday deploying half-scale versions of the units. I'm not sure if I have a good image of it anywhere. They kind of look like this. These little, they almost look like parking garages, but they're made out of this biodegradable concrete, and we have half-scale versions that we're deploying on Saturday at the Cape Shore Lab. So we'll do some initial testing there to see what's going on in terms of sediment. You know, we'll be able to see some of the oyster recruitment dynamics, but you know, our big major test is down in Florida later this year.
Awesome.
So hopefully
That
soon
is
we'll be getting more up here.
Really interested in that material.
Dr. Z had a comment in the chat here. Says, are there efforts to standardize or establish best practices for the data collection while using these novel tactics? It's great to try new approaches, but if there's a lack of data in comparable scales or format, the usefulness to evaluate success and failure in relationship to each other and additional products would be lost. I don't know if anyone has any specifics on just, you know, from using any of these novel tactics, you know, kind of what you've been doing for, again, you know, for best practices. Again, feel free to come off mute.
I agree. And first and foremost, I want to ask folks for your novel tactics, what data must you collect per your permits? And then this group can start talking about what's not permit required, but what we need to start thinking about to do exactly what you're saying, standardize across different projects. So what's required by permits right now?
Like in terms of like the contents of a monitoring plan or the entire permit application? Which
No, so if we're installing, let's say Ella's new novel tactic, what sort of monitoring would be required for a project that's using a new material in the intertidal? that a loaded question?
So I will say, my expertise is more in the dredge material, placement of dredge material. Well, Lindsay Davis is a whiz at anything living shoreline, has been doing these for years. So I don't want to speak on behalf of, the many projects that Lindsay has reviewed, because I haven't. But I will say, just in terms of a monitoring plan, if there's any chance that the placement could elevate turbidity levels, we would want some sort of turbidity measurements as well. Else with monitoring, we want to know success. We want to know anticipated success, like what are your goals? And then I guess those reporting requirements as well. Sorry, I just got distracted. We'd want all the specs on the data, and then, a really hard question. I'm sorry, Danielle, to cut off.
Once I started asking it, I realized that that's not going to be answered like here. But what we could do is address what Z's saying, and that is, which data do we as resource managers want from these projects to streamline permitting, to understand novel tactics better, and to fill data gaps? I know on her mind is SAV monitoring. So if we're installing a living shoreline project, a breakwater project, we want to see what the SAV is doing in response to that. But how do we standardize how people collect SAV data? That is something I'm hoping this group can work on. Z, do you want to come off mute and talk a little bit more about your question, or address the SAV metrics? Yep, you don't have to.
Try. I'm sorry, I have bad audio. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So yeah, it was more like a general question just to see what data are being collected. I'm, thinking of the different projects that, Al mentioned at the ALS. And what I've been doing in all the projects that I've been involved in with SAV is kind of then standardizing it, because we do lack kind of minimum standards, particularly for SAV. Because that's my wheelhouse, so I know that very intimately, to make sure that everyone is at least getting these parameters and consistently following them with a monitoring strategy for 5 years. So before we declare, hey, this is a great tactic and here's the success matrix, how do we know that that truly is the metrics that are indicating success? And are we losing some metrics that aren't being accounted for that actually could indicate failure? So Forked River, for instance, I don't know, had I not kind of just elevated the project and added more SAV work and more soil work that wasn't required of any of the permits. But what we're finding at Forked River is actually those hexo baskets are changing the soils to a negative for SAV recruitment. But those data never would have been collected had, I not kind of turned it into an SAV project. It's not required from permitting or monitoring at the level that I'm taking it. So it's maybe a question that we can ponder as a group to create kind of those lists of, not every project can be done at the level of a university researcher wanting to pull something out of this to inform future decision making. But if what you're attempting to do with these novel tactics is use them in the future at other sites, I think having that conversation would be important, so that you have metrics and compare apples to apples, rather than down the road being like, oh, let's do that same project and not knowing the metrics that would have been useful to determine success or failure in your particular site.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think especially with a lot of these novel tactics too, is trying to collect as much information as possible to find out what works and what's not, what doesn't, and having those lessons learned, of good and bad, and being able to actually have those to bring over to your other products. Like, oh, hey, we measured this and found out this happened. So we're not going to do this. We're going to try this instead. So I think it's going to be as everyone's kind of trying to figure out, what to do, how to do it. It's going to be a lot more, I think, a lot more work in the upfront, and then it'll slowly, I think, we'll probably get to those like official pieces that are really like the big important pieces, depending on what you're looking at for that relates to the goals of your project. So I
Right.
think,
Well,
you know,
their intended use to take the goals from one project and lessons learned and apply it to a future project. Even
Yep.
some of the dredge hole projects that I've been involved in, you know, I'm taking a lot more soil samples because soils are so important for seagrass growth, and it's not required. I just was lucky enough to be brought in. The DOT brought me in for one particular project. And so now they're able to come back and say, what have you learned so that we can incorporate this into future dredge hole projects? But they don't really want that level. It's going to cost more money to get that level of information for other dredge hole permits. So it's this conundrum of, we want more information to inform future decisions, but we don't really require it for the permit. So then who pays for that gap? Who pays for that gap of the additional information that everyone can benefit from, whether it be dredge hole projects or living shorelines? Who pays for that additional monitoring that's not required? But for seagrass ecosystems, like I always say, 5 years at a minimum is what you need. So who steps into that void? Because that data gap is used by everyone, by DEP, by NOAA, by the nonprofits, by the community. So it's a bigger problem. I don't have the solution for.
I have two thoughts. Is this work group is supposed to help fill that funding gap. So we're going to identify these questions, like with regards to SAV, and develop research proposals to wrap around these coastal resilience projects. And then the second idea, where you're talking about like tier 1, tier 2 type monitoring. When I say tier 1, I mean bare minimum, basic, standardized metrics that we can translate to projects. Tier 1, cheap, maybe has a citizen scientist role, something that we can all kind of do and doesn't cost a lot of money. Develop what a tier 1 monitoring plan for living shorelines, marsh restoration, reef restoration projects look like. Develop tier 2, what we as restoration practitioners might be able to cover with baseline data and might be required by permitting anyway. And then tier 3, those research questions. And so I don't know if Josh is on the call, but one thing we talked about working with the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative is adapting some of the existing monitoring guidelines to do exactly that. Develop those tier 1 standardized metrics, those tier 2 standardized metrics. And one guide that comes to mind is the New Jersey Living Shorelines Monitoring Guide, which is a little outdated, could use some tweaking, and we could fold in this question of SAV perfectly in there. You know, an example of tier 1 SAV monitoring could be an outline extent of SAV at a site. I think most people are able to go out there with some sort of GPS equipment and at least delineate where, you know, SAV begins and where it ends. And then maybe tier 2, it takes into account the sediment grain size, those sorts of things.
But you still want to know the density and the composition. That's important. You can say there's SAV across the whole project site, but what Dr. Z's does, of course, which is great, now we know densities and things like that. So like when we moved the reef, because that was the best area of growth right there. It's very patchy in Barnegat Bay. So I don't know if extent is applicable. That kind of goes back to, was it historically there? You know, and the environment's dynamic, it's changing, and maybe it's not, and maybe it hasn't been there for 10 years, or I don't know. I mean, we want it to be there. I found it interesting too, and I agree with you, Dr. Z. Our grants end usually 2 or 3 years. So once that funding's gone, we're always looking for that extra funding for the research of things. And I think we've been very fortunate so far with Fork of River Beach to get some of that lined up, even though our funding's almost gone for that. And I really want to see what happens in 5 years or 10 years. But I think at the same token, as we're moving through it, what we're seeing now is still early on in the stages of that project. And I'm glad we're seeing it. But it would give us solutions as well to think, okay, if we need to amend that substrate, where do we do it based on how that sand could transport within that project to create the substrate you want to establish that SAV and make denser beds? That's kind of where I'm thinking of it. So it's adaptive management again. And maybe we don't have to incorporate any adaptive management in 5 years because maybe things are starting to rebound after that. So maybe it's a longer term. And we see that in the marshes as well. So in the marshes, like Thompson's Marsh, if you're not familiar, it was just an acre that we restored. And it took 4 years to get 81% coverage of Spartina. And we just seeded and all that. And it was great how it all worked, but 4 years. And it looked like a mud hole for 2.5 or 3 years. So having that long-term data really can help guide decisions later. And then I just want to also say it's dependent on the project you're doing as well, of what you're monitoring. So if you're doing marsh, or let's just say you're doing beach and reefs, you're looking at elevations, you're looking at settling rates, you're looking at accretion are you reducing erosion rates? You're looking at biodiversity, you're looking at what's settling there, and all these different things. And then when you look at marsh and you look at SAV, kind of similar to me in a way, you're looking at density, composition, percent coverage, substrate, these different things, and that should be incorporated. Maybe those, you kind of divide them up by different project. And I know NIMS or NOAA Fisheries has their tier 1 for like reefs that we incorporate into our proposals, when we're writing grants. So some of that's already out there for sure. And maybe it's a way to compile it and kind of tailor it to what New Jersey needs in these different regions of Jersey.
I see Jim's had his hand up, so I don't know, Jim, if you wanted to come off mute. I don't know if you had a question, comment.
So yeah, I like everything that's being discussed. Mine was just some other tactic that obviously we're very much early in the testing phase. Actually, we're going to be ordering some devices here this summer and testing them out. The low cost, low tech crew that's been starting work throughout Delaware Bay and sites at Barnegat Bay, Forsyth area. So don't want to intercede with the conversation that's going on right now, since it's certainly one that's needed. So I'll let it up to you guys.
Jim, let's put a pin in that for our marsh restoration topic, if that's okay. Because there's a lot to unpack with marsh restoration, and if that's okay with you for now.
No, that's fine. The particular devices I'm looking at, they have kind of different types. So there is applicability to living shorelines, but also marsh. So it's kind of like combination. So I'm
Dropping off
fine.
waiting for new tires. Yeah, they should be here already. They ordered them yesterday.
Let's see, mute her. Yes, I all of these things connect, right? So we started with SAV, and now we're here at Living Shorelines. We're talking about how those connect. The next piece is marsh restoration and how that connects to all of this. We have a lot to unpack with SAV and Living Shorelines right now. And, I really wanted this meeting to really delve into that. We need a whole other meeting to do that. So our next meeting in July, we are going to continue this topic and start to do that parking lot of action items. Like Leanne said, we should definitely look at the framework for developing monitoring plans. Yes, make that a parking lot item. Think about the other guidelines that we can compile and use for this tier 1 metric standardization exercise that we're going to start looking at in the fall.
Yeah, Daniel.
Wow.
So I did quickly. I just put in the chat the link for the company that we're working with that are using kind of these 3D printed devices for various things that we're going to be testing out over the next year. So certainly folks can peruse it and we can talk about it more next time.
Do you want to, we have 9 minutes left. Why don't you take a minute and, or if you want to wait, that's fine too. Sorry.
All right, well, quick, I'll just show the website. So
yeah.
Several of us, actually some of Danielle's colleagues and I are working on some low cost, low tech marsh resiliency, but this is kind of getting into the living shoreline side. So we met this company down at Ray this past year and have been working with them on some various different things they have. This was their marsh guards that they have. It sort of drills into the mud and it kind of mimics biomimicry of vegetation. So ways that you can bring back mud flats and say into vegetative states in some more lower energy environments. We actually came to the conclusion that we could actually use it to address some of the ditching that's occurring in marsh systems. But by and large, they have all these beach and shoreline protection. This is the marsh guard. They have these dune growers, different things like that. So that's where I kind of figured it maybe it would make sense with this group. But essentially with this one, what kind of got us interested in it is its applicability and its mobility to be able to be redeployed over time, very simply. So this is a case study that they did down in Lake Pontchartrain. But essentially these devices, I don't know where the video is, I don't know this website, but essentially they're just put in with a drill, and you can probably handle a couple dozen of these at a time and move them kind of in an array like this. And as you're creating sediment from a shoreline edge, like Dr. or Captain Al said, you can keep moving these things out further and further, and they'll play around with different dimensions, heights and diameters of the overall structure, and it can be reused. I don't know where is it.
But it's similar to like a helical anchor, right? And how it's done.
Yeah. So this is them deploying.
I'd like to try those out.
And Jim, is the idea that these don't stay in the system forever? It's like a temporary sediment accretion device that you're then pulling out after you meet your objectives? Is that the idea?
And they could be redeployed into like the next front edge. So if this is the living shoreline it's creating right now, once it accretes to this edge, you can take these things out as simply as they're put in and put them out a little bit further. But so we're buying 30 of these, and we'll be testing them in a couple different scenarios over the next year or so with the grant that we have with the low cost, low tech crew. But there's a couple different designs and things that they've come up with and tested and have information on if people are interested. Just a way, because we were thinking of ways with these expanding mud flats, the old salt hay farms that are basically converting to open water. How can we go about incrementally adjusting some of the accretion rates in certain areas where it still could keep up with sea level rise and get vegetation on it, but also make it so that it's easily deployable and doesn't take machinery to get it out there, like fire logs and things like that tend to get pretty bogged down and heavy. And so we're using a combination. So we're actually using these in combination with choir logs, hay bales, and some windrow fencing, some other tactics that we're going to be doing in small pilots to kind of look at them all together collectively. But this was just a different one that we just recently came across that we brought into the mix. So we're working with Army Corps and DEP right now on a JPP coming up to get some permits to put these out and do some monitoring around it.
Yeah, Jim, it just made me think like there's an opportunity probably at Basket Flats to try a little pilot there, and even Slade Dale that's already kind of set up for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you don't have that many of them, and you're looking for smaller areas. And I mean, that would kind of show we created a low energy environment, we hope, at mouth of the Morris, and it's low energy already. It'd be interesting to see the edge and how things accrete, and if you can actually. I'm even thinking behind breakwaters versus in the gaps between the breakwaters, because we're doing some of that kind of testing too to see how all that works.
Yeah, I mean they've got different things, even with the beach dunes situation. So Al, I know you do that a lot with the beach restoration. So there could be some synergy there too with this company. But anyway, yeah, I just figured throw it out there. People can all on it, and I can. Obviously, I don't have much to share. I haven't actually tested them ourselves, so we're just going to be looking into it for now. Anyway, finished early. I didn't take 9 minutes, so.
No, I think it's really interesting. I see a lot of pros to using that, but maybe there's a few cons that, leaving some of that material in the system would have. But if it's a temporary sediment accretion tool, I think that's great. And then you use vegetation and core logs to kind of reinforce what you've put there. Love it. Yep. Does anyone have comments on that tactic, pros or cons or questions?
Well, I like you can move it. you know, and you can do it with volunteers, it seems like. So that's great. So that keeps it kind of cost effective. You know, when your grant's over, you can still have a little bit of funding to come through it. I'm not sure about the materials, but you know, maybe there's a way to do it with some structure using something else that's more natural. So you don't have to use that, you know, again, thinking a little bit out the box, but we were thinking of, well, I know Shane always wants to do like upside down tree roots, you know, somewhere. And maybe that's the top of the base and you screw something, then they get no helical in. Maybe we could do something with a Christmas tree, but you know, if you're worried about the needles and that kind of thing, who knows? But that has that kind of same shape to me, you know, and we've seen other things like, what are they? Reef something, but anyway, they're discs that you put on pilings. You know, you can do that to attenuate waves, and we were going to do that in the East River of New York along a wharf. And then in between that, you have habitat for fish, you know, these limestone rings. And we priced that out in Delaware Bay to do one of our beaches to attenuate waves just to check. And it was way beyond what we could afford for that. But I'm sure there's another product out there. So I think it's good. I don't know if this is always part of CHARRMs, but inviting people to give a new product, just something to think about, you know.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, the reef makers or what you just showed, Jim, it's all something we can build upon and then even do one project that has different pieces there, or I don't know. Or again, the combination of all of them as you move towards that shoreline or away from that shoreline. Maybe this one works better between the inshore and offshore reef. It kind of, who knows?
And we were going to get into that today with the discussion, and I had like a bunch of pictures of tactics like what you're describing. We're going to do this next month. So if you have tactics that you want to display to the group and start to have some of those conversations, please bring them next month. And remember that CHARRM, yes, we're interested in novel tactics and as restoration practitioners, but we are also really interested in our resource agencies' feedback and figuring out where data gaps are for some of these projects as well. So bring your topics of conversation around those novel tactics for next month also. We also didn't have a lot of time to discuss what we learned from the SAV webinar, so we'll use next month to do that too. So next month, SAV and novel tactics, and start to parking lot action items for this group to work on this fall. Today, we talked about one, and that's standardizing metrics across novel tactics. We'll start delving into that and forming work groups to work on that this fall. So with that, do any of the partners have last minute comments or questions? If not, thank you so much, Louie and Captain Al. Great presentations, a lot of great information there. Louie, I think you are now a member of CHARRM. We will be asking you to come back and talk to us about some of those other companies and some of the work you're doing in Chesapeake Bay, because it sounds very, very interesting. I'd love to bring up some of those ideas here. So yeah, thank you guys so much for coming today and your participation. This webinar will be on the NJCRC site. Check it out, and emails on how we make that transition, starting to use Zoom and sort of new technologies to come. So stay tuned for that. If you have any colleagues or folks that you think need to join our CHARRM group, email me. I'll add them to our listserv and forward them the invitation. With that, thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone.